Welcome to this roundtable discussions on a transformed working life and the role of civil society. These themes are part of a pamphlet, Basic Income, Cornerstone of the Nordic Welfare State, where Gerdur Palmadottir from Iceland has written on the role of civil society, and I, Vivan Storlund, from Finland and the Netherlands, on a transformed working life. As guests around this digital table, we have artist Narcy Calamatta from Malta, the anthropologist Martin Schoenhals from the US, and sociologist Gudmundur Oddsson from Iceland. So welcome to you all. I'll start by giving a short overview of the problems we face in working life and the solutions a universal basic income would be. After that, Gerdur will introduce us to her views on what civil society could be like if we had a basic income. And after that, our guests are requested to say what you think of a universal basic income and how it relates to your activities, whether artistic or theoretical. So the working life. The regulation of working life is increasingly out of sync with the very varied conditions under which people work. Labor legislation offers us a one-size-fits-all model, long-term full-time employment. So what are the implications? I want to differentiate three settings. One setting is people having some form of employment contract that is not long-term or full-time. In such settings, people are working under constant uncertainty, making up the growing precariat that also includes working poor. A second setting involves present and future prospects of artificial intelligence, doing away with existing jobs. We need to envisage new approaches where human dignity is a point of departure. And then the third setting is one that is alien to labor law's premises. And it is one that offers a roadmap for human dignity as a point of departure. This is a paradigm we already have in the creative sector and in civil society. So what we need to do is to change our perception of work to include all activities in which people are engaged. This would, like Alexander the Great's sword, cut the Gordian knot in which out-of-date rules and regulations are entangled. And what I find very interesting is that from a perceptual perspective, we have the phenomenon that if our focus is on people's activities, the sharp distinctions we have between working life and civil society disappears. With the personal autonomy that a universal basic income provides, people can choose in what activity to engage. And this will allow for self-organizing processes where people's needs and interests are a point of departure. Isn't this what society should be about? And I think this is a good place to hand over to Gerdur to tell about her views on the role of civil society.
Yes, well, I am an incurable entrepreneur. I'm always doing some new things or testing things out on the spur of the moment. And I've come to the conclusion through my long life of experience that humanity is just, it's divided in two groups. It is the I group and we group. And if we would blend this together, we would have some kind of equal society. Because the I people, they are, you know them, we all know them, they are running matters as they are today and have always actually been doing so. And then we have the we people, some are always think in a much bigger scale than they can individually do. We people always think about the global. So that is why their projects are sometimes hard to realize, because they expect participation. Anyway, so I think that the UBI, the cornerstone of the Nordic state, is a great title, but it should be, and will be, of course, the cornerstone of human society. Because UBI is, in my until now, the only realistic and sensible solution, which has been made complicated because it's very hard for people who don't want the society to be independent to agree to their independence. So that is why we are stuck, and we have the same. We are always, making the soup in the same poisonous pot. We always use the same method of choosing people to run the society. To choose political parties to do that is just a suicide, because as soon as a political party comes to government, their promises and the things that they talk about or whatever, they turn into the loyalty for their own political party. And they are always betraying the others in their party if they're honest towards the people, to the people that they owe their loyalty. So I think that is our core failure in trying to change things, because we are always talking to people who don't need the change for themselves. Their only way to fulfill their promises is by using UBI as the method today, as a payment term, that it is the priority to start to pay their subjects the due income, which should be, and security, which should be UBI. And then on top of UBI, it's like startup money as such, like basic education is our startup intelligence, possibilities. Because if you don't learn how to read and write, you are very limited in what you can do to help yourself. But some people, of course, can do it they learn by doing. And that's often more difficult. But we also have to think that all skills, all education, and every single company or what we are using, academics or whatever, they are based on somebody's experience. Because every company is based on the investment of society, society should be a shareholder in every single company. And we can then have totally different rules. We would not have any company rising like Amazon and Google and Facebook.
Thank you very much. Then we will turn to Narcy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for including me. I can see that we all agree on the idea of UBI. We are not the only ones who agree on this. Also, Pope Francis quotes it by name. And I used his quotes in my 3 articles. I wrote 3 articles about what is UBI. The other article is how to apply it and how Malta is almost already applying it with handouts it gives to students, to startup entrepreneurs, and to anybody starting a new business, any new activity, NGOs, because they are also workers, not-for-profit organizations. The Malta government gives a lot of help all around, but it's not official to give a UBI. Why not? Because we have not educated the people who need it We have not educated them on what it actually is and how it can be implemented. So in my third article, which I call the thin edge of the wedge, you know, a wedge is a triangle. The thin edge goes in easier because it's thin, and then you widen the gap. We have to have one standard example how this can work. And my argument is that we should start with artists. We will find a group of artists, and I am suggesting that the group of artists should be new graduates, new university graduates of the arts, whether it be music, painting, visual arts, or theater. They for sure will never get a job in the first year. So in that gap, we should provide for them. So I am saying that let's find a section of society where UBI can work well. Why do I say it can work well? Because an artist is an intrinsic worker. An artist doesn't find the easy way out. An artist gets up in the morning and writes out the ideas he dreamt about last night, or starts painting the idea he developed in his sleep, or sits at the piano and practices till he becomes so perfect he doesn't think. An artist cannot stop working, doesn't stop to rest. He has to finish his job. Even if he doesn't get paid for it, he volunteers to do it because it's something has to come out. So when you go with the argument to politicians, thank you, Gerdur, for bringing out the word politicians, because they are the rulers, all right? If we find one politician, let's say the Minister for Arts and Culture, and this would get him votes because the politician is only there for 5 years to get as many votes as possible. We say, look, all the artists will vote for you, provided that in the first years when they leave university or college, you give them a leg up. Not a minimum wage. It has to be more than a minimum wage. It has to be halfway between the minimum wage and the average wage. He is capable of starting his own so-called business, his own job. I don't like the word job anymore because it implies employer, employee. I like paid work. Work that renders an income, all right? And I will close here. This example, if it works, will then encourage other minority sections of society, like athletes, like researchers, who can never start on their own. They have to be employed by somebody to research. So if they don't have to worry where they get their croissant and glass of hot milk and the roof over their head, if they don't have to worry about that, they will work harder and they will give back to the nation honor, credit. And when they are successful, they will employ a lot of people to support them. one singer in a football stadium, the turnover in one concert is far, far more than any cup final. So the artist could be a good example. This example I am quoting has been tried in California by one mayor on 150 artists. It started in the beginning of this year for 6 months. I don't know what the result is because it's not published yet. But once we have a good example to work on, then we'll find another sector, then another sector.
Thank you very much. And here I think, Marty, you have been thinking a lot of work too, new perceptions of work. So can you just then follow up on what Narcy has said?
Absolutely. So, Narcy, as an amateur musician myself, I think about this issue a lot. There are so many people who are good writers and amateur musicians and artists and doing really good work, and yet they can't make a living, of course. And that shows the kind of disjuncture between making a living and producing something that is valuable for other people, but also valuable for one's own sense of fulfillment. I think we really need to think of a new way of conceptualizing work. Work is not only something, well, should not be something that we earn a living to sustain ourselves with. It should be something that becomes non-obligatory, freely engaged in, and meaningful for ourselves as well as other people. And I think UBI would make that happen. It would make work be seen in a new way as something that is not an obligation, not a kind of sacrifice. There's not a scarcity of the means to sustain all of us. That's a fiction that is propagated by people who want to control workers. And changing the nature of work, we change the kind of dichotomy that we make between work, which is a necessity and a sacrifice, versus play, which is something enjoyable. I want to break down the work versus play dichotomy and make work into something that is enjoyable for all people, as play is. I think that this will make work into something that can be more communal, because work as it's configured today is something that we each individually earn a living from if we are lucky enough to have paying work. And so it pits us against each other. And by breaking down that kind of capitalist competition that exists between individual workers, work can be done in a more communal way and become much more satisfying as a result. I also, throwing out lots of different kinds of changes, but I think that it's important to say that the kind of division between the family versus the workplace and domestic care versus paid work, that division needs to break down as well. So I imagine that the family and the community can be a locus for creation, as well as the paid workplace that exists today. And if we do all of these kinds of reconfigurations, work can be something that is engaged in freely and engaged in for joy and pleasure rather than because we are compelled to do it. And that is a huge, huge transformation that I think would lead to a much more humane society for all of us.
Thank you very much. Then we come to a sociologist's perspective.
You know, UBI has for the last couple of years been less like buzzing, you know, close to my ear, or although it's not something that I've been, you know, studying in like particularly studying. Okay, but as a sociologist, you know, when I hear your discussions, I always consider myself to be a hopeless optimist, but I'll probably sound like the skeptic in this group. So I mainly study, you know, class dynamics. And, you know, I've realized, you know, through my, you know, 12 years of studying class, you know, that, you know, all improvements that come to people, you know, marginalized people come through collective action. And I do see the potential of UBI to sort of like motivate people, because I think it's one of the more progressive ideas that have come around in the last, you know, years and decades, you know, to, you know, at least move us in the right direction. However, what my questions, because, you know, the sociologist in me, you know, starts moving around to like, okay, how do we define our terms? Because when I read the UBI literature, people seem to be talking past one another, because what some people talk about UBI means to alleviate poverty, you know, whereas in other contexts, it means something else. It's much more minimal. So I would, of course, want to start by defining our terms, but then also how feasible is it, you know? So where does the money come from? And also, because this is a Nordic centered conference, okay? And talking about collective action, capitalism looks quite different in the Nordic countries than it does in other Western countries. If we only focus on the Western countries, capitalism looks quite different in the Nordic countries. And that has to do with collective action. That's because we have a social democratic version of capitalism here, you know, that would arguably, you know, facilitate a more smoother transition to a UBI system than under liberal capitalism or some conservative version, or in other parts of the world. So let's say in the global South. And then I'm also thinking, you know, where does capitalism fit into all of this? Because the most generous versions of UBI that I've read about essentially, you know, to me spell the end of capitalism, which in my ears sounds great, but you know, but I'm just wondering, you know, how feasible does it become? And also, I just wanted to touch upon one thing that Gerdur mentioned. Yes, UBI, I do think, helps improve the, you know, bargaining power of an individual. But as someone who sees the world through the lens of a class analyst, I wonder what this does for collective bargaining power. And I think this is where the let's say the opposition from trade unions and labor unions comes from, is that it actually worries that it might, you know, put a dent into collective bargaining power, while at the same time, you know, even if it might, you know, increase the bargaining power of an individual. But again, I have so many questions, but I know that I only have 5 minutes, Vivian. So maybe if I have time, I will just, you know, pepper them into our conversation. Thank you.
And do you want to comment on each other now?
One of the things that I might say from the standpoint of a very brutal capitalism, living in a very brutal capitalism, is it really surprised me when Andrew Yang ran for president. He's a young man who proposed UBI, and that was his main position. And I can tell you, and I wanted to put this out there, that my students who otherwise are really alienated from politics, they became really interested in his ideas. And so I think that the young who are facing precarious employment, and what's happening in the US, I'm sure it's happening lots of places, is people being employed without benefits, employed as non-members of companies. As that happens more and more, I think that young people and the precariat will become a larger and larger constituency that will support UBI.
I agree, and
the academy is one place where, at least in America, we know how precarious things can be. There are so many people being underpaid as adjuncts, $3,000 a course, which is not even livable.
Exactly. So I actually taught. I was an assistant professor at Northern Michigan University for 3 years, and I had a tenure track position, and I was quite aware of the fact that I was one of, I was in the, privileged 25% in a tenure track position.
Yes.
It's a very tenuous occupation. Yeah.
Very.
But what I wanted to say is concerning the security of or what do you call it, bargaining power. Yes. I think exactly the opposite, because what it is that the unions, which now are always fighting, they spend all their energy in minimum wage, minimum this, minimum that. They're all focused on minimum and survival and scratching and everything like that. They should turn the power of the unions can change drastically by becoming unions for working people, and I'm not talking about employed people. The companies have to start selling themselves. So you're not bargaining with them or fighting with them or anything. They have to sell themselves to you. Do you want to spend your precious time, energy, talent, and whatever with them and receiving your income from them? So it becomes, and so we have to mark companies. They'll be easily read. We mark them with stars, just like hotels or whatever. So you see, and nobody wants to be a chef or an owner in a 1.5-star company.
Whether you get up in the morning to go to work or to think, because thinking is part of work, and you stay in bed thinking, okay, you still should get a state contribution and money.
Mm-hmm.
So tomorrow you still have your bed and you still have the roof over your head. The Pope says the worker should be given the dignity to refuse work. Otherwise, it is slavery. But of course, the people who rule are put there by the powerful, by capitalism. So, the less noise, I think, this is my opinion, that we make, the better. And we go in first, in my opinion, with artists, then with sportsmen, then with inventors. So the inventors, the researchers, who might be looking up information for years without finding that one thing that will change society. We need these people. So, all right, let us, who are inspired by it, spread the education. So we keep on educating what we call in English the grassroots. And then that will grow, will come up as a general opinion. Meanwhile, these sectors who are so precious to change society, to contribute to society, as Marty said, society needs those people, all right? Then they will set an example to the politicians. Look, this thing works. The system will never change. Supply and demand. Okay? It has to be almost a totalitarian government that says, I don't care. Every citizen who's 16 years old till the day he dies gets a UBI.
Narcy, I like your idea very much, and I think it should be considered. And I also think that, and this is an optimistic way of thinking, but that we will reach a crisis point where there just simply aren't enough jobs that pay a living wage for people because of automation, and that will necessitate a rethinking of what work is and will stoke an interest in basic income.
Well, I'm more of a believer in people. I think that inside every person is an entrepreneur, and I think that we are God-given, have the facility of creation, and we all want to do things. It is an urge in us to do things, and we are not talking about getting a bloody job. We have to change our thinking of not what work is, but who we are, what we want to reach and how we reach it. And we do it by igniting our interest, curiosity in each other and in what we want to do.
If we look at the history of mankind, want to go back, well, let's not go there. But, if you look at the history of mankind, the history of capitalism is very short. Okay. If the history of man is, the size of the Eiffel Tower, capitalism is the snow on the top. Okay. So I don't think that we will have capitalism into the unforeseeable future. So I do think that, UBI or if it will be called something else, we will have a different system, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And I do think that these discussions, help, push us in that direction. And I do think that UBI would be one way of raising the baseline of inequality. Okay. So lifting more people above the poverty line and, offering universal basic services or income or whatever you want to call it. It's just about a matter of how we go there. Iceland is the most unionized country in the world with a unionization rate of 90%. The US has a unionization rate of 10%. Okay, that's a huge difference. I don't know where Malta falls in or other countries, but but here we have two extreme cases, with different institutional, let's say, with different institutions, so like to make it happen. But I think I'm in agreement with Marty that, eventually we will reach this point, because I do think that, we will see more and more unemployment. It might come in like ebbs and flows, but I think eventually we will have reach almost a crisis point where something dramatic needs to happen. When will that happen? Will that be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or 50 years from now? I'll leave that up to the prophets to speculate about. But thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. This has been a very interesting discussion, and let's hope that it will bring us one step closer to our goals.